Hey, AP World History. This is Missy here, and we are going to talk about writing an SAQ to practice for your test. I'm just going to give everybody a minute to hop on here. And then we will get started. There's also a link below. Hey, Trang. There's a link below in the description if you guys want the presentation that I'm going to be using. You can also just follow along on the screen. That is fine too. Hold on just a second. I'm going to see. So some people are having problems getting on. Hi, guys. I don't know why that is. I can also keep my volume on Teams. Okay, so we're gonna get started. What's up? What's up? I got some people on here and I got some people on Teams. I decided to do it on YouTube today because I wanted the A-Day kids to be able to access it. So that's why we're doing it over here on YouTube today. Just let me pull up this for these guys if they decide to stay. All right, so some quick reminders about SAQ. First, you need to make sure that you are addressing the prompt. What are they asking, and am I actually answering the question? A lot of times I've read SAQs that the question isn't even answered, and you're definitely not going to get the points for that. So make sure when you're looking at the prompt that you're trying to figure out what are they asking and how can I answer this question? How can I make sure that I've answered the question? Then you're going to start with a topic sentence, somewhat like a mini thesis, okay? And so if you're answering a change, then you would say one change, blah, 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 or one continuity, blah, 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 okay? Make sure that you, in that topic sentence, tie it to whatever your prompt is, whatever you're answering. And that will help you as you're going through answering the question, because it will help you like realize like what you are trying to answer. If you forget as you're like halfway through writing it, you can look at that topic sentence and remember, oh yeah, this is what I'm doing, okay? Then you're going to explain how and why with vocab words. So how does it happen? Why does it happen? What kind of vocab words can you put in with the topic that you know? Vocab words would be like people, places, you know, events, new technology, basically the historical words that go with that topic. Then if you have a stimulus, make sure that you are connecting it with the answering of the question. For example, if there's a primary document and they ask you a question about the primary document, you have to talk about the primary document. You have to say how the primary document answers that question, or how the picture or how the graph answers that question. If you completely ignore the fact that you have a stimulus, then you won't get the answer to that question either, okay? Also, I forgot to tell you guys, the link to this presentation is down in the description. If you're watching on Teams, I'll put it in the chat here in a little bit. Yeah, so not necessarily recite the question, Trang, but you could use some of the wording of the question. I got to take this off because there's a little jingle bell on it and it's driving me crazy. Hold on, they're trying to get, okay, sorry, Alexis. If I'm lagging, then, you know, just watch it on one or the other, either Teams or YouTube. So not necessarily like reciting the question, you don't have to do that, but you can definitely use some of the wording, somewhat like what we do when we're writing a thesis. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. All right, so this is kind of small on the screen. I hope you guys can see it well. Thank you. I like it too, but that little jingle bell was just kind of throwing me off. I'll put it back on for later. Anyway, let's do a quick review of Peter the Great and Russia. All right, these are some things that we talked about with Peter the Great, so you should remember most of this stuff. But just a quick review, and then we're going to look at an SAQ concerning Peter the Great. So who is Peter the Great? He was a Tsar of Russia, and he legitimized his power through building St. Petersburg. Now remember, rulers legitimize their power through art, religion, and architecture. We talked about several examples of how that happens. Peter the Great specifically built St. Petersburg, and as he was designing it, he did it to show his power. If you ever get a chance to go to St. Petersburg, definitely go. It's one of the most beautiful cities I've ever been to. And you can see influences of Europe all throughout St. Petersburg. At the time, Russia was kind of behind Europe, all right? And Peter the Great had traveled throughout Europe, and he really, really liked the architecture, and he liked the way, like the feeling of Europe, and he wanted Russia to modernize and kind of get on track with where Europe was. So you could really say that he was influenced by his travels through Europe, and therefore wanted to like bring Russia into that time frame. And he, by doing that, he wanted to westernize them and make them more like Europe. So originally, he wanted to model St. Petersburg after Venice, but the river freezes in the winter, and that's a problem, right? Because you can't travel on a frozen river. But and so it didn't really like work out for him in that way. But during the summer, it's lovely because people have boats and you can take boat rides through the city, and it's very similar to Venice. It's just not a form of transportation that they can depend on because it doesn't work in the winter. He also built buildings in European style. So there's a lot of buildings there that have architecture that is similar to Europe. And he wanted Russians to dress in more Western fashions. All right, so he's basically just trying to change Russia as a whole into more of a European style area. All right, so make sure and remember that for your test, because it will definitely help you to remember that. All right, then let's look at this SAQ. Hopefully it's big enough. I think it'll be big enough. All right, so this is a stimulus-based SAQ. That means that you have a primary document that you're going to be using in order to answer this question. So our source says, Western dress shall be worn. Oh, first of all, it's Peter the Great is his decree on Western dress. That's important. You always want to look at the source first and see who's writing it. And also, before we read the prompt, or before we read the primary document, we need to read the prompt. So you're answering these three questions. According to the document, explain one way that Peter the Great sought to westernize Russia. B is identify one purpose of his decree. And C, identify one other way that Peter the Great sought to westernize Russia. So the very first one talks about the document. That one you definitely need to address the document. You can use some evidence from the document. The second one says the purpose, right, of the document. And the third one is completely, just from your brain. That's your own knowledge. So for at least A, you need to address the document. Keep that in mind as we read. I'm just going to check. Okay, yeah, okay. So it says, Western dress shall be worn by all the boyars, members of our councils and of our court, gentry of Moscow, secretaries, provincial gentry, gosti or merchants, government officials, the Streltsky, members of the guild, purveying for all household, citizens of Moscow of all ranks, and residents of provincial cities. So just everybody, excepting the clergy and the peasant tillers of the soil. So those are the only two groups that don't have to do it. The upper dress shall be of French or Saxon cut, and the lower dress will be waistcoat, trousers, boots, I think that should say shoes. Sorry, I might have misspelled it when I was typing it. And hats shall be of German style. So everything needs to be of German style. They shall also ride German saddles. Likewise, the women folk of all ranks, including priests, deacons, and church attendants' wives, the wives of dragoons, the soldiers, and the Streltsky, and their children, shall wear Western dress, hats, jackets, and underwear. From now on, of the above, from now on, I think it's supposed to say all of the above mentioned, is to wear Russian dress or Caucasian coats, sheepskin coats, or Russian peasant coats, trousers, boots, and shoes. So no Russian wear at all. All right. And who is it? Everybody except for the clergy and the peasants. So as you're reading through this document, keep in mind, we're trying to use the document to explain one way that Peter the Great sought to westernize Russia. So how would we write that very first one? Take a minute and think of a topic sentence and then put it in the chat. And if you're on Teams, you can put it in the chat on Teams as well. And we're just writing a topic sentence for that very first one. For those of you on Teams, you can see my screen, right? Let me know. All right, anybody got a topic sentence for me? I'm waiting. Anybody out there got a topic sentence? Okay, I got one on Teams. Anybody else? Okay, this is a pretty good one. It says, one way that Peter the Great sought to westernize Russia was with the change of clothing. That's not too bad. However, remember that we're tying it to the document. So in your sentences after that, you definitely need to address the document. You don't necessarily have to do that in your topic sentence, though, so that's not too bad. I would maybe say the change of clothing from Russian dress to European style. That way you remember, what you're arguing. Just kind of make it a little bit more specific, but not too bad. All right, I got a couple more up here. Let's see what we got from Trang. Peter the Great sought to westernize Russia through the normalization of European clothing. Okay, not too bad. One way that Peter the Great sought to westernize Russia was by forcing to change the traditional clothing and banning any Russian clothes. Yep, that's good. According to the document, one way Peter the Great sought to westernize Russia was through having his citizens dress in Western European clothing. Very good. You could add according to the document in there. Yes, Trang, you could. According to the document, Peter the Great sought to westernize Russia through the way they dressed. That would all work. All right. Then you're going to start in with your topic sentences. So what you would do then is use something from this document to prove that. So you could say, for example, according to the document, if you haven't said according to the document yet, you could throw it in there. So you could say, for example, according to the document, they were supposed to be wearing German type clothes instead of Russian clothes. And this included everyone except for the clergy and the peasant tillers. Now, why is he doing this? Well, you could talk about some of your outside knowledge about what you know about him, that he traveled throughout Europe and he wanted to bring Europe into a more modern era and westernize them, something like that. Okay, that would bring it full circle. So you're explaining how he did it, you're explaining why he did it, and you're putting in some vocab words, you're addressing the document. Does everybody understand that? Any questions? Okay, going on to letter B then. When you write this, make sure that you do it in 3 different paragraphs. So you would have A and then your answer, then you have B and your next answer. So question B says, identify the purpose of this document. So our topic sentence would be something like, the purpose of this document is. What do you guys think the purpose of this document is? It's a decree. What is a decree? Type in the chat what you think a good topic sentence would be for that one. I will, Carlos, I will answer that question in just a second. Let's do the topic sentence for this one, and then I'll tell you. Okay, Tabina says, one purpose of this decree is to force westernized outfits on the Russians. Yes, very good. And then when you're talking about it, make sure that you say that a decree is a law. That way the reader understands that you know that. And that putting this law into place is going to make sure, or is going to be something that the government will enforce, right? Because it is a law. You can't say no to it. Let's see what else we have. Sahir says, a purpose of this decree is to alter Russian culture to be more akin to that of Western Europe. Awesome. Yes, very good. Trang says, the purpose of this decree is to let everyone in Russia know on the forced change of dress from Russian clothing to European style. Absolutely. Yep. And Carlos says, one of the purposes of this decree is to force the change of culture in Russia by making the change a law rather than a choice. Yeah, that's good too. Peter the Great's purpose to this decree was to westernize and modern Russia through clothing through the law. Yeah, awesome. So those will all work. Then when you go into that paragraph, you're going to talk about, maybe you could add some more evidence from this. You don't want to use the same stuff that you've already used in A, but you could say something like, his wording is very strong, and it says from now on, all of the above mentioned shall not wear any Russian dress. Like, it's very forceful wording. You can tell that he means business, that this is a law that is going to be enforced. And it also includes saddles. It's not just clothing, right? So you can maybe throw that in there as well. You want to make sure, though, that you're using different information, because you can't use the same information that you've used previously. Now, Carlos had a question about what's the difference between an SAQ and an LAQ. SAQ and LAQ are different types of essays. All right, so SAQ is the short answer, and it's always going to have A, B, C. And you always want to write a paragraph per section, okay? Then the LAQ is the one that has the thesis, the context, the evidence paragraphs where you're arguing it, and then I think one of the points is using change in continuity and historical skill language, and then the complexity point. Okay, so that's the one that has the longer rubric. SAQ is much shorter, to the point. LAQ is longer, hence why it's called a long essay. We have one more that we haven't learned yet that you get to learn when we come back, called the document-based question, which is a DBQ essay. So we'll learn that one when you come back. Those are the 3 types of essays that are going to be on the AP exam. Okay. All right, let's look at that last question. Identify one way that Peter the Great sought to westernize Russia. One other way, sorry. Identify one other way that he sought to westernize Russia during this time period in 1450 to 1750. So this one is not associated with the document. If you write about how he westernized Russia with clothing, it will not get you a point here, because this is another way. This is outside of the document, something that has to be from your brain. So give me a topic sentence for that. Think back about what we just talked about and what we just reviewed, and then also anything else that you might know from this time frame of how he tried to westernize Russia. Okay, so we have some coming in. So here says, another way Peter the Great sought to westernize Russia was through army reform. Yeah, absolutely. And then you can start talking about that. That's good. Jocelyn says, Peter the Great tried to westernize Russia through art, clothing, and architecture. That's all true, but remember that you talked about clothing already. So I would take that one out and focus it on art and architecture. That way your examples can be really specific, all right, when you're writing it. Because remember, you're just writing one paragraph about it, and you already talked about clothing. So just focus on examples of art and architecture. And those kind of go together anyway, so it works out well. And Carlos says, another way that Peter the Great sought to westernize Russia during the period 1450 to 1750 is by changing the architecture throughout Russia by mimicking the European style. Yeah, very good. So then you could talk about examples in St. Petersburg and how he built St. Petersburg. The only thing I might, if I were you, I would narrow it down to St. Petersburg, just because I'm not sure that he did it anywhere else other than St. Petersburg. I think it was mostly there, because before he took over as Tsar, St. Petersburg didn't exist. He built St. Petersburg on drained swamplands that he got from Sweden, I think. And so that's why it gave him this opportunity to build in the European style, because there wasn't anything there prior to that. But I'm not sure that he did anything in Moscow. That I would have to look up. He might have. So try to be specific with these so that you can give evidence. But I mean, if you know that he did some in Moscow too, then you could give that as evidence, right? So it kind of just depends on what you know, how much you know. Over on Teams, Marisa says, Peter the Great made many social reforms to reduce the dominance of religion, mainly Christianity, and made Russia more secular and educated. That one's good too. You could use that. One way Peter the Great sought to westernize Russia through the change in architecture with the influence from Europe. Yeah, absolutely. And then you could go into some examples. You could talk about the Windsor Palace. You could talk about, trying to think if there were any other buildings that we looked at, you know, just basically like the streets that, well, and how he wanted to make it like Venice with the river going through it and stuff. So yeah, very good. All right, does anybody have any questions about this SAQ? The biggest thing to remember, if you have a stimulus, make sure that you connect it to the prompts that are asking you for it. Also, if they're talking about a change, for example, westernization is a change. So what was it like before? What was it like after? So in this one, if you're going with architecture, you could talk about how before he built St. Petersburg, it was just swampland. And he drained the swamps and built St. Petersburg. And because he's building this fresh new city, he wants it to be westernized. And he's able to do that because he doesn't have to tear down any buildings, right? It's very easy for it to be influenced by Europe because there's nothing there. All right. All right. Let's go to the next one. So the next one, we're going to talk about the Maroon Wars. And we mentioned this very briefly when we were talking about internal conflicts and external conflicts, but we didn't really go into it too in depth. So unless you did a lot of reading on in the AMSCO book, you may have missed this. I'll get to that question in just a second. So the Maroons are descendants of runaway African slaves in Jamaica. And Queen Nanny is one of the runaways who united them into a rebellion. They start their rebellion in the Caribbean, and other slaves will join them for freedom. And the Maroon Wars take place from 1728 to 1740 and 1795 to 1796. They're against the Spanish. So it's the Maroons against the Spanish, trying to get the Spanish out of there. In 1791, slaves from Haiti will join the Maroons in fighting for freedom. That eventually leads to the Haitian Revolution in 1801. We won't talk about revolutions until next semester, but how this is all connected is that the Maroons kind of start these rebellions, and then the slaves from Haiti just continue it into a revolution. Frank says, on the AP test, what is the time limit for writing SAQ? I think the SAQ is 13 minutes you have per SAQ when it breaks down. And LEQ is, I think LEQ is 30 minutes. I'll have to look up the exact timing of the LEQ. It's not very long, and that's a problem because sometimes you get flustered with that amount of time and you just can't think, right? So that's why we have to practice the time limits and when we take our test. But at the same time, I don't want to do that too early because you also need to practice how to write them, right? And the structures of how to write them. So the best thing to do would be to practice on your own as much as possible. Come to tutorials to practice. I can give you prompts all day long and you can practice. That's definitely the way that you're going to get faster. The other thing is, sometimes with the SAQs, you might not have a stimulus and you might not know anything about the topic. So is it worth even wasting any time on it if you have no idea about the topic? No, it's not worth it. Go to the next SAQ and spend more time developing that one. You know, you want to pick the ones that you can absolutely write about. Then if you have time, you can go back to it and try to write something. But SAQ, LEQ, all the essays, you can't really, fake it. You have to either know it or you don't know it. And so that's why it's good to read the prompt. If you're like, I have no idea what that's about, go to the next one. Focus on that just because of the limited time. All right, so let's look at the SAQ on this one. This one doesn't have a prompt with it. So this one's going to have to be from your brain. Identify one way that the slave trade led to internal challenges in the New World. So we could use the Maroon Wars for this example, if you know about the Maroon Wars. If not, you could totally use a different example. This one's not tied to a document, so you're free to use whatever example you want. So make me a topic sentence for this one. Identify one way that the slave trade led to internal challenges in the New World. Anybody got one? There's one that just popped up. Give you guys about 30 seconds longer. Okay, so this one's really good from Sahir. It says, one way that the slave trade led to internal challenges in the New World was slave rebellions destabilizing European colonies. That's great. And then you could go into talking about the Maroon Wars and how it leads to the Haitian Revolution. You could talk about other rebellions that you know of. Any rebellions, really, you could talk about. So that's a good one. The next one, Trang has, one way that the slave trade led to internal challenges in the New World is the introduction of diseases through trade that killed millions of indigenous people. So, tell me how you would develop that, because depending on how you argue that, it might work. But what is the internal challenge? Is it the fact that indigenous people are dying, or how does that create a challenge for the Europeans? Kind of try to flesh that out a little bit more, and give me some more details about that. Let's see. Mauricio says, one way was that the slaves aboard the ships were clumped together, so it was easier for pestilence to spread. When they arrived in the New World, the pestilence killed a large portion of natives. This resulted in the reduction of human labor for Europeans. So that's not too bad. That would be more of like a cause of why Europeans started the slave trade, right? Because the indigenous people couldn't survive, and they weren't able to work because of the diseases. So that one would probably be better for the question if this was like, what is the cause of the slave trade? Internal challenge, though, is more of what's happening internally that's giving a challenge to the Europeans, the people that are trying to like take over. And that's just based on how this standard gives that definition. I could see where you could maybe argue diseases as an internal challenge, but then you'd have to somehow link it to the fact that because so many of them were dying, it still I think is more of a cause of the slave trade. But maybe you can give me more details. Maybe you can come up with more details and explain like how that would relate to the challenges. Carlos said, one way that the slave trade led to internal challenges in the New World was the rebellions from slaves that obstructed the Europeans' progress. Yeah, rebellions would definitely work. This was from, what unit is this? Let me see. Internal. Okay. So the standard is internal and external challenges to state power. So I guess when I wrote this SAQ, I should have been a little bit more specific in writing it and saying that the slave trade led to internal challenges to state power. Then it would have been better to use the rebellions. Does that make sense? But what you're trying to argue, Mauricio, as well as Trang, I think that that's going to be more of a cause of why there was the slave trade. So if the question was, what is one cause for the African slave trade, then that would be the perfect answer for that. This is from 4.6. So if you have time, go back through and just glance. It's only like, it's 4 pages long in the AMSCO book. And it goes through the different internal and external challenges. But now looking at this question, I should have added to state power in that question. So letter B says, identify another way that the slave trade led to internal challenges in the New World. So this would be another separate way from what we did. So if we talked about rebellions, then you have to think of another way that it's going to add to internal challenges. For example, the caste system. That's definitely going to add to internal challenges with identifying people by race and eventually going to lead to the Latin American revolutions, which we also have not talked about yet, but we will when we come back in January. And then letter C, explain one type of a coerced labor system in the New World. So you guys should be able to get a topic sentence for this one. What would your topic sentence be for this one? Take a couple of minutes and see if you can think of one. Okay, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds longer. Carlos wrote us one for letter B that I want to share with you. It's good. So this one was another way that led to internal changes. And he said, another way that the slave trade led to internal changes in the New World is that it created racial social classes and it led to the empowerment of Europeans and their superiority. Very good. And then you could go into describing the caste system and how that caused internal problems. That's really good. And then for this one type of coerced labor system in the New World was the encomienda system, which rewarded conquerors with the labor of particular groups of conquered non-Christian people. Yep. And then you could go into explaining how and why that happens. That would be great. Awesome. And then Trang says, one type of coerced labor system in the New World is the encomienda system enforced by the Spanish. This system forced Native Americans to work for food and shelter. Yeah, very good. And then you could add, add why that happens. Well, why do they need workers? The silver trade, the plantation. Actually, for the encomienda system, it would be to work on plantations, not the silver trade. If you're talking about the Mita system, then that could be the silver trade. And Tobina says one type of coerced labor system in the New World is the encomienda system, which forced natives to work in mines, but later started paying them. Okay, that's true, but when we're talking about the silver mines, it would be the Mita system. Remember, that's the one with the Incas. So there's a couple of different ones, the encomienda, the hacienda, and the Mita. I think I'm saying it right. Trying to. All right, very good. But there is a possibility that even if you said the encomienda system in relation with the mines, sometimes a reader will skip over the wrong information and still accept it. It just kind of depends on when they grade your essay. If you get lucky enough to have your essays graded later in the week, sometimes they're a little bit more flexible. Just depends. Okay. So that's SAQ. I think that's all I got. Yeah, that's the SAQ review for you. I'm going to go back real quick to the reminders. Make sure that these are some things that you remember in your brain. All right. Always start with your topic sentence. That will help you focus your writing. Explain how and why. Put as many vocab words in there as you can. Make sure you're addressing the prompt. Okay. So think to yourself, if I'm talking about a change, did I just talk about a change or did I talk about an effect? Did I talk about a cause? Make sure that you're actually talking about a change. And then once again, with change, just like on the LEQ, you have to talk about what it was before and what it is after. And that shows the change. And then addressing the stimulus if you have one. On AP Classroom, I have opened up for you some free response practice. If you'd like to practice on that, and I don't know with the free response, I might have to grade it and then give you the rationale, or they might give you the rationale even before it's graded. I don't know. That'd be interesting to check out because we haven't done those yet. So if you want to today during flex time, because we're about to go into flex time, you can practice one of those free response. And then after you write it and submit it, let me know if I need to look at it and give you feedback. If I do, then I will. If not, they might just give you the feedback right away. There's also multiple choice on there to practice. When you're taking it, it's not timed, but you can bring a stopwatch up on your phone, the little like counting up watch, and time yourself. See how long it's taking you. Because remember, you have a minute for each one of those questions on the AP exam. So kind of time yourself. If you're at 2 minutes right now, then just keep practicing and try to get faster. Okay? So those are two things that you can do, as well as studying. Make note cards. Make note cards, make note cards. I can't stress how important it is to get this information in your head, because the more that it is in your head, the easier these questions will be to answer. Does anybody have any questions? SAQs on the review guide. So the ones on the review guides, Trang, are actually LEQ prompts, and those are extra credit because we're not doing an LEQ on this test. So I just made them extra credit. As long as you have them in there before the next 6 weeks, I'll grade them anytime that I get into your notebook. So it's not a certain time that those are due. The review guides, I'm also not going to take a grade on because we did them together. So you can have it in your notebook, but I'm not going to take a grade on it. If you decide to do the LEQ prompts on there for extra credit, make sure and label that in your notebook so that when I get in there to grade it, I will see it and I'll grade it. Multiple answer questions. So those are on AP Classroom. What you're going to do is log on to AP Classroom. That's what we logged on at the very beginning of the year. And you'll just go, if you don't know the website, just Google AP Classroom login and it'll come up. you're going to log in there and look for progress checks. The progress checks are the ones that you're going to want to take. And I know they're in there. I had some students practicing them during Saturday tutorials. So just let me know if you get in there and can't find them for some reason. All right. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And make sure you study this weekend. Have an awesome weekend. And I will see you on Tuesday for our Unit 3-4 test. Let me know if you have any questions before then. All right. I'll talk to you later.